Every great empire has its humble beginnings, and today I'd like to take you back to 1994, the year where one man and the electronics company he worked for sought to bring their vision for the future of gaming to the players around the world. Welcome to the ultimate PlayStation comparison, the evolution of PlayStation home consoles. The tale of Sony Interactive Entertainment begins in the mid-90s. Sega Enterprises had just launched their 5th generation 32-bit home console, the Sega Saturn, 3DO has lost all traction, Atari's Jaguar is pretty much dead on arrival, and Nintendo's Ultra 64 has been riddled with delays. Enter the new kid on the block, Sony Computer Entertainment, led by visionary Ken Kutaragi. Ken Kutaragi had an established history with the Sony Corporation as an engineer, and he saw a huge potential to grow the gaming business beyond anything Sega or Nintendo could ever hope to achieve. To do this, he knew that SCEI needed to be bold and aggressive with their approach. They needed a great piece of hardware backed by a diverse catalog of software, and the result of their endeavors was the original PlayStation. Launching at the famous price point of $299 US, the PlayStation came packed full of state-of-the-art technology, including a 32-bit RISC-based CPU clocked at 33.86 MHz, 2 MB of RAM, 1 MB of video RAM, and a dual-speed CD-ROM drive. Put all of this hardware together and you've got a system that's capable of outputting 16.7 million different colors, 380,000 flat shaded polygons per second, or 180,000 texture map polygons per second. While this doesn't sound like much today, trust me, in 1994, this was bleeding edge. With the power of the PlayStation and an aggressive marketing campaign, SCEI led the console race, not just in hardware sales, but in available software. This was because the PlayStation, unlike the Sega Saturn, was much easier to develop for, and unlike the Nintendo 64, used compact discs, which allowed for developers to create larger, more expansive worlds than ever before. It was through all of these clever decisions and listening closely to the demands of both in-house and third-party developers and publishers that SCEI went from being the new kid on the block that many were skeptical of to market leader, securing publishing deals from many of the third-party publishers and developers and stealing them away from Sega and Nintendo. The PlayStation as you see it here would remain on sale from 1994 up until July of 2000, when Sony would release a revised system officially renamed PS1. This is a PlayStation just like the original, but it is much smaller in its form factor, and it has one neat trick up its sleeve. Long before the era of PlayStation Portable, the PS1 was portable as well. With the help of this optional LCD attachment, you could play PS1 games whenever, wherever, forever. And you could either do it with the help of an optional car adapter or a wall adapter. These systems would remain on sale up until March of 2006 and would leave a legacy behind of over 3,000 games developed natively for the platform and over 102 million units sold throughout the world, a first for any console manufacturer. With their newly found triumphs, SCEI and Ken Kutaragi were ready to tackle their next major obstacle, create a worthy successor to the original PS1. And a worthy successor they created. At Tokyo Game Show 1999, at the turn of the millennium, Sony Computer Entertainment unveiled the next generation of PlayStation, known as PlayStation 2. The PlayStation 2 would go on to launch in March of 2000 in Japan, with the North American and European rollouts happening in October and November of that same year for $299 US. For that much cash, you were getting a custom-built CPU known as Emotion Engine, which was clocked at 300 MHz, a custom-built GPU known as Graphics Synthesizer, clocked at 150 MHz, 32 MB of RAM, 4 MB of video RAM, a 24-speed CD-ROM drive, and a 4-speed DVD-ROM drive. Put this all together and you've got a system that's leagues and bounds ahead of its predecessor in terms of processing power. But while it may have been SCEI's future, that doesn't mean that their past was left completely behind. You see, one of the biggest selling points in PlayStation 2 lays in the fact that the system was natively backwards compatible with all previously released PS1 software and peripherals. This feature alone carried over tens of millions of PlayStation fans, as all of their old games were now playable on their latest PlayStation home console. Another feature that helped propel the PlayStation 2 into almost instant success was the fact that the system shipped with a DVD-ROM drive, as I had previously mentioned. This meant that not only games could be played off DVDs, but movies as well. And for many people back in the early 2000s, PlayStation 2 was acting as a DVD media hub, as it was cheaper than any other DVD player on the market. From 2000 to 2003, this monolith of a game console was the way to play PlayStation 2 games and software. That was, with one exception, in one particular territory. In Japan, the Sony Corporation launched another system to coexist with the PlayStation 2 and officially named it the Sony PSX. Now, this system was very unique for its time, and there's a reason why I'm mentioning it in this video. First things first was that the system was a PlayStation 1, a PlayStation 2, and a DVR all wrapped up into one 13-pound acrylic chassis. The second thing is that this was the first ever Sony manufactured device that utilized a user interface that many PlayStation users would later become familiar with, the cross-media bar, or XMB. On top of that, this system shipped with a 160GB or a 250GB hard disk for the low price of $700 or $900 respectively. On top of all of that, these systems could record music, photos, videos, and TV straight to the system's hard disk, and you could edit all of that media and burn it to a DVD disc. However, these systems were plagued with reliability issues, and a perfect example is the one you're looking at right here. I had initially purchased this thing to show you guys the system in action, as well as the cross-media bar in its earliest state, but before I could start recording, it died. Not exactly something a lot of people would be willing to shell out over $1,000 to get their hands on, and as a result, it never left Japan. While the PSX crashed and burned in Japan, Sony Computer Entertainment was already working on a dramatically different revision to their already successful PlayStation 2 home console. The result was the SCPH-70000 PS2 Slim Series. When looking at both of these machines right next to each other, it's crazy to see just how much Sony was able to shrink their classic monolith of a gaming console. Now, there were some features that were stripped out, such as the onboard power supply that was then moved into an external power brick, but one thing that was added was that Sony added an Ethernet jack to the back of the PS2 Slim, something that you actually had to buy an accessory for on the OG PlayStation 2. From 2004 until 2007, the SCPH-70000 series was the only PlayStation 2 you could buy, until Sony would revise the system one last time with the SCPH-90000 PlayStation 2 Slim series. This system is by and large the same size and form factor as the 70000 series, but with some subtle styling changes, and somehow Sony managed to reincorporate the power brick back into the unit itself. It's crazy to see just how much the PlayStation 2 had changed in its lifespan on the market, and you really don't see any kinds of extreme console revisions like these happening anymore. The PlayStation 2 would go on to prove to be an absolute juggernaut of a platform. With over 3,800 titles developed natively for the system, legacy compatibility with all previously released PS1 software, the system would go on to sell 155 million units around the world, making it the greatest selling home console of all time, even to this day. By this point, one thing is clear. Sony Computer Entertainment is setting very high expectations, not only for themselves, but from what their players expect from a gaming and multimedia platform. They were able to create a worthy successor to the PlayStation 1, but now they had to do it again, but this time create a successor to the almighty PlayStation 2. But times were changing, online gaming is starting to take off, and the competition is starting to get fierce. Could Sony repeat their successes the next time around with the next generation of PlayStation? At E3 2006, after multiple production and development delays, the PlayStation 3 was revealed in its final two forms to the general public at an infamous asking price of $499 for the 20GB model, or $599 for the fully fleshed out 60GB model. The PlayStation 3 came equipped with a very unique microprocessor called the Cell Broadband Engine, clocked at 3.2 GHz with 8 SPEs running at the same frequency. It also had 256 megabytes of RAM, a custom-built graphics processor called Reality Synthesizer or RSX, which was clocked at 500 MHz that also had 256 megabytes of DDR3 RAM. The 60GB model came with built-in Wi-Fi, SD and compact flash readers, 4 USB ports, HDMI output, and most importantly, a Blu-ray disc drive. The 20GB had the majority of those features, but lacked the SD and compact flash readers as well as the Wi-Fi. It Carrying on the tradition of legacy compatibility, the PlayStation 3 came equipped with hardware-based backwards compatibility for not only PlayStation 2 titles, but PlayStation 1 titles as well, giving it a full catalog of the history of PlayStation games at launch at a time where there were very few games available for the PlayStation 3. And just as PlayStation 2 had solidified DVDs as a mainstream format, the PlayStation 3 was solely responsible for giving Blu-ray the advantage over HD DVDs. For people looking to create a media center in the early to mid-2000s, it was the perfect all-in-one gaming and multimedia device. But at $499 and $599, it was a pill too tough for many to swallow, and something had to change quickly because the once beloved PlayStation brand was falling out of everyone's good graces and was quickly overtaken by the competition. From 2006 to 2008, the future of Sony Computer Entertainment was looking grim, because despite the system's high asking price, it was rumored that Sony was losing over $300 on each PlayStation system sold. On top of that, development for the Cell broadband engine and the RSX chips proved to be really troublesome for third-party developers and publishers, and the result was many of the early games on PlayStation 3 looked far worse than they did on the competition, despite its theoretical advantage on the spec sheets. This was due large in part to a major lack of optimization between the Cell, its SPEs, and a very weak reality synthesizer graphics processor. In 2009, amid some management reshuffles, CEO Kaz Hirai took to the stage and unveiled the first major rebranding and redesign to the PlayStation 3, known as the CECH01 series or PlayStation 3 Slim. Gone is the original Spider-Man font, and a new logo has taken its place, invoking the older PS2 and PSP logos. But Sony didn't manage to achieve this redesign without sacrifice. Gone are the SD and compact flash readers, the total amount of USB ports has been reduced from 4 to 2, and legacy PlayStation 2 compatibility has been dropped completely, only leaving PS1 software support. But not all was lost, as the system went from having 20, 40, 60, and 80 GB hard disk options to 120, 160, 250, and 320 GB hard disk options. The PS3 Slim would essentially go on to undo the complete disaster that was the original PlayStation 3 and would help return the PlayStation division into profitability and market presence. In late 2012, SCEI would reveal the final redesign to the PlayStation 3. Known as the CECH01 series, the PlayStation 3 Super Slim once again drastically reduced the size of the PlayStation 3, but it wasn't without costs. The biggest major change that came in this redesign was the fact that this PlayStation 3 dropped the mechanical loading drive in favor of a more old-school top-loading style disk drive, and while it was much smaller, many people felt that this design choice was cheap. However, in my personal opinion, I believe it will probably outlast all the other PlayStation 3s as it has less moving parts to deal with. The PlayStation 3 would go on to accumulate a library of over 1,700 different titles available on physical discs, with over 800 games available for digital download only on the PlayStation Network, and will go on to sell approximately 87.3 million units around the world, climbing its way up from a dead and distant last place into a solid and well-earned second place, outselling its main rival, the Xbox 360. I think it's safe to say that Sony learned a lot and took those lessons to heart, because what would happen next at E3 2013 was a far cry from what unfolded back in 2006. At E3 2013, Sony Computer Entertainment unveiled this, the first generation of PlayStation 4. Where the PlayStation 3 was powered from the ground up by a completely foreign architecture, the PlayStation 4 was built on a standard x86 architecture powered completely by AMD. What this means is that while the PS3 was a nightmare and required a steep learning curve to program for, the PlayStation 4 development process was much simpler by comparison. While the competition crashed and burned, Sony Computer Entertainment had one goal in mind: to create an affordable system for the players. And what you were getting for $399 was an 8-core Jaguar CPU clocked at 1.6 GHz each, an AMD Radeon GPU clocked at 800 MHz, 8 GB of GDDR5 RAM, another Blu-ray disc drive, built-in Wi-Fi compatibility, and a user upgradable 500 GB hard disk. While the graphical leap from PlayStation 3 to PlayStation 4 wasn't as drastic as previous generations, there were significant improvements. You just had to know where to look. Things like particle effects, resolution, frame rates, and in-game draw distances all saw significant increases over the previous generation, and for $400, the results weren't too bad. While the PlayStation 4 would go on to be an overnight success, outpacing the sales of even the mighty PlayStation 2, Sony Computer Entertainment went to work on bringing a more affordable PlayStation experience to the home. The result of these endeavors was the PlayStation Vita TV, or as it was known everywhere outside of Japan, the PlayStation TV. This little micro console is essentially a PlayStation Vita repackaged in a home console format that utilized the DualShock 3 and DualShock 4 controllers. However, there were some significant problems with it. First of all, the fact that the PlayStation Vita used proprietary memory cards that were so expensive caused many people to not even consider PlayStation TV. The second thing was that many of the PlayStation Vita's greatest games utilized the front and touch interfaces on the system, and these weren't patched to work with a DualShock 3 or a DualShock 4. And the result was many of the PlayStation Vita's greatest games were whitelisted as incompatible with the PlayStation TV. And finally, because of Sony's own fear of their PS Vita brand name, many people thought that the PlayStation TV was nothing more than an Apple or Roku TV style box competing with them, and not its own little platform compatible with its own library of games. The result of all of these poor decisions was that less than 2 years after the system launched, it bombed and was discontinued almost immediately thereafter. 1 year after PlayStation TV's demise, Sony's cash cow, the PlayStation 4, got its first major redesign, the CECHB01 series, or the PS4 Slim. Like all traditional console redesigns, some corners were cut, this time literally. The optical audio output was dropped, the light bar is no more, but what you gained was 5 GHz Wi-Fi connection speeds, and the system ran much quieter than its predecessors. But 2016 was just full of surprises for PlayStation players, as we not only got the PS4 Slim and the announcement of PlayStation VR, but for the first time we got a console redesign known as the PlayStation 4 Pro. While the PlayStation 4 system was designed to take advantage of Full HD 1080p TVs, the PS4 Pro was designed to take advantage of 4K HDR television sets. This refreshed system is a more powerful PlayStation 4 that is compatible with all the same previously released games and accessories, just in a repackaged format. While games like God of War, Marvel's Spider-Man, Horizon Zero Dawn, and Detroit Become Human all look fantastic on a regular PS4, those same games, when played on a PS4 Pro in 4K HDR, are nothing short of breathtaking. It is truly incredible to see Sony do a complete turnaround from the PlayStation 3 era into the PlayStation 4 era. The system has accumulated a library of over 2,000 games, and as of the making of this video, has sold 96.8 million units around the world, and truly is the strikes back for Sony Interactive Entertainment. And now that the next generation is right around the corner, we just have to wait and see what's in store for the future of play.